Last week, one day when I was in my office, I had an unannounced visitor. Now, this person was very familiar to me, someone who I speak to nearly every day, even if it's just to say hi. She often doesn't respond. This person does not own a house, does not live in an apartment, doesn't even have a car to sleep in at night, and is a very, very familiar sight around St. Luke's. Some might categorize her as homeless, which in some ways feels derogatory, but also probably quite accurate. What we know of her living conditions are far from what any one of us would consider ideal. So this person entered my office to ask me for something, and it seemed like a bit of an unusual request. "Can I borrow some tape?" she said. Now, in my ongoing effort to make everything more complicated than it needs to be, I responded, "Well, what kind? Of Scotch tape, masking tape, duct tape, electrical tape, two-sided tape?" All of which I knew to be residing somewhere in one of my cabinets. And she just pointed at the simple dispenser on my desk and said, "I just need a piece." And still trying to complicate it, "Well, how long a piece? Do you need an inch or maybe 3 inches or maybe 2 pieces?" Like, just a piece. And before I could reach out and reel off the perfect length piece of tape for her, something else on my desk caught her eye. Gabriel, our new 7-week-old 14-ounce church kitten. Her previously expressionless face just sort of beamed at the sight of this kitten, and she asked if she could hold him. And she picked him up, and he nuzzled into her arms, and she cooed appreciatively at him, as do all of young Gabriel's visitors these days. So she handed the kitten back over to me, and I went to tear off a piece of tape. And then she said, "Can I borrow a pair of scissors?" further piquing my curiosity. I said, "Well, what are you trying to do?" She said, "I want to fix my headphones." And knowing full well, back at the house, I've got a drawer of half-used headphones. I'm sure there are dozens of pairs probably in the shop. I said, "Do you want another pair?" "Nope." And she walked out with the scissors and tape. About 20 minutes later, she came back with scissors in hand. And she gave me the scissors and then handed me a $20 bill. And she noted the puzzled expression on my face, and she said, "Give it to somebody who needs it." I tried to protest, "But don't you?" She waved me off and walked out the door. And there I was, standing with a $20 bill earmarked for somebody who needs it, given to me by somebody who I thought surely fit the bill. I was touched and a little taken back by this act of generosity. It's amazing to me what the honest intentionality of a gift can mean, regardless of its size. And I really think that that's what Jesus was talking about at the end of this gospel story that we just heard today. We are called to be faithful with what we have, with good and honest intention. And being faithful probably means trusting that we can give away what we have and still have enough. What we give may not seem like much, but it teaches us to be even more faithful as we let go and know that we can survive. Now, I got to admit, this gospel story at first is a little bit confusing. At first, we hear about this dishonest manager who lowers the debts of his master. And then somewhat unexpectedly, we see the master praising the manager for his shrewd use of resources. The debate at Tuesday morning Bible study about what this meant went on for the full hour, and we came to no logical conclusions. Different authors have said, well, maybe what Jesus is doing is telling his disciples to be long-sighted with their wealth, or maybe the master is really in favor of this. And my favorite answer comes from my partner, the Reverend Sonia Waters, who said, Jesus was just being sarcastic. But it was the commentary offered by Christ that follows that story that's the real nugget that I want to think about today. I want to think about the latter part of this gospel where Jesus says, whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. I want to balance that out with the other messages about wealth that we hear in Luke's gospel and in Acts. In this gospel story today, we're told that we can't serve both God and wealth. In fact, we're told that God and wealth are perhaps on different ends of the spectrum, and we are called to choose sides. Now, Jesus is clear throughout his ministry that money and what we do with it is a really important part of our faith lives. Jesus talks about money all the time, a heck of a lot more than he talks about sexuality. And despite what we hear in the press about what the church's debates are, this is what Jesus taught about. Jesus teaches us about what we are supposed to do with the wealth, the material things that we have, and how that affects our soul and our faith lives. And what we do with a little bit is indicative of what we do with a lot. And that's actually really good news for us, because in Acts, which is supposedly written by the same person who wrote Luke's gospel, Jesus' followers are told what to do with their wealth. Give everything and follow me. That's a lot to ask. But what we do with a little sets the direction and the tone in our lives. So whether we tithe the full 10% or something less than that, it's still a small portion of what we have, what we give back to the church, what we give to God. And it's in this little bit that we're asked to be faithful. Now, in understanding how a little bit of what we have affects what we do, I want to look sort of the flip side of this. Now, we've all known people who are generous, and we've all known people who are stingy. What's always surprising to me about the stingy people that I know is they won't pay for the smallest little things, even though they might drive a fancy car and live in a big house. I think the corollary of this is the most generous people I know seem to always drive beat-up old cars. Now, it doesn't mean that if you drive a nice car, you're not generous, but it seems like the generous people that I know really do drive beat-up old cars. Now, there was this group of guys I used to hang out with in Cincinnati at work, and we'd go out for a drink sometimes after work. And it was legendary how this one guy would never, ever, ever pay for a round of drinks. The rest of us seemed to take turns week in and week out, but this guy never did. I can pretty much guarantee it wasn't because he was, short of funds, because of extensive charitable giving. And he drove home to a nice house in a really nice car, Corvette. So what we do in a small way really does point out to what we do in a lot. And we should remember that in other areas of our faith practice as well. This is what the bigger message in this. The things that we do with a little set the direction. And it's actually really good news for us. We have to try with intentionality, and the quantity becomes less important. It points the way. I mean, that $20 that was left with me last week was surely not the biggest gift that the church got that week, but it was certainly the best. We are called to be faithful in little things first. It gets us started on the right track. It keeps us from being too overwhelmed by what we might want to do. I mean, we would love, just about everybody in this room would probably love to stop global warming, especially if you believe that it's real. We would love to have peace in the Middle East. We would love to feed the homeless in the world. We would love to give them a place to live. Every single one of them. but probably that's too much for any one of us. But you are not called to stop global warming by yourself, but we need to be conscious of what we consume and how we consume it. You cannot solve Middle East peace by yourself, but we are called to create peace with our neighbor. You cannot feed every hungry person who walks the streets of this country, but you can help feed the hungry person who lives next door. Give this $20 to someone who needs it. That line is still sort of stuck in my head, and I'm probably overanalyzing it the same way I'm overanalyzing what type of tape was appropriate and how long the appropriate length should be. But it just shows how we get in our own way and in God's way sometimes when we try to think too big, when we're really called to be faithful in just a little, and recognize that everything that we have is a gift from God. We are called by this gospel message today to make a choice between God and wealth. We get to choose which one is our master. One calls us to give away $20. One calls us to hold on to it. One calls us to be generous. One calls us to be stingy. One calls us to help others in the world, and one calls us to help ourselves. Who is the somebody who needs it? And what are we going to do about it? Amen.